Welcome to Doc NYC's Spring Showcase, our mid-year celebration of documentary films and series. My name is Samah Ali, and I am the Senior Programmer of Shorts and Doc NYCU. And it's my pleasure to be speaking with the directors and cast member of Girl State, sponsored by Apple TV+. Please welcome our director and producer, Amanda McBaine and Justin Moss. Want to just wave? And then we have one of our subjects here, Emily Worthmore. Hi. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm very much a privilege of mine to be asking some of the questions that I'm sure our audience members at home are so curious about. Jesse and Amanda, I'll start off with you. Can you share more about how this documentary came to be and why you chose Missouri Girl State?
Sure, I'll start. Yeah, thank you. We were curious after Trump's election and confronting the divisions of our country and how teenagers were experiencing those divisions and what they could tell us about our political future and our ability to actually engage in civil discourse, which seems like something that we're losing in our country. And we read about the Boy State and Girl State programs that are sponsored by the American Legion. We ended up in Texas making Boy State really sort of by happenstance. We actually were talking to Girl State in Texas, and it just worked out that we got access first to Boy State. But always we were curious about the girls. We have two teenage daughters, Amanda and I, our parents, and we think a lot about how young women are growing up in America today, how they're finding their political identities and how they're experiencing what's happening in the adult state. And so we made Boy State, which worked out pretty well. And we were thinking immediately and always actually about when we would follow up the film, where we would follow it up, and how, but not why. We knew it was an important conversation that was a companion to Boy State.
And I think why Missouri? Yes. So we wanted to get out of Texas. I mean, the country's big, there's a lot of states. We auditioned a number of states, but for a lot of reasons, Missouri was our choice because it has a huge, well, first of all, it's a really interesting state politically. You have everybody from Josh Hawley to Cori Bush, so the really extreme polarization of politics, but also the program there is giant, and we needed that. We wanted, democracy gets messier the more people who try and organize something together. So we wanted a big, robust program. We wanted the leadership of that program to be game to work with us, to collaborate with us, to allow us to do what we needed to do is immerse ourselves. And that's not everybody, which is okay. But for all those reasons, we ended up there.
I love that you just mentioned, Amanda. That's such a good way to think about democracy. The more people who become under the umbrella, the more messy it gets. And I think you definitely see this with Girl State and even with, of course, the previous film. Can you share more about the casting process and how you found the amazing leads?
Well, we learned in Boy State how critical casting is because the week-long program is so intense, it's fast and it's furious. You don't really have time as a filmmaker to find people, to build a relationship, and then to follow them. You have to actually figure out who you're going to follow in advance. And it's a big program. In Texas, it's 1,000 boys. In Missouri, it's 500. So we had about 4 months to meet hundreds of young women across the state, first via Zoom, and then in person, and really just get to know them. And there's no checklist for us. It was really looking for ambition and confidence and political interest. And then really an openness to the camera and to being a part of a project like this, which is a lot to ask of anybody, and really kind of paradoxical qualities to be so confident and yet so open. And when we met Emily, for instance, we were I think she cast herself. I mean, I think it's just so apparent that she should be in our film. She told us she was planning to run for president in 2040. And but beyond that, she was just so determined to make the most of this experience, to have political conversations about the issues she cares about, and that she was really open to having a camera follow her through this experience, which is really a lot to ask. And she was brave to say, sure, I'll try it.
Emily, do you want to share more?
Yeah, obviously I was really excited to be a part of the project. I didn't know how mainstream it would become. And so when there was an opportunity to be on the dock and sign this waiver for release form as for, everybody who was going to be that week might be on camera at some point. So we all were signing it and learning more about what the documentary would be. I, of course, was interested in the opportunity since it seemed like a cool way to obviously now get to showcase more about that week in general, but also just being open to politics. And I think that at the time I was very excited, and I'm so glad that I decided to be a part of it.
I'd just add that we ended up casting, there are 7 girls in the film, and 6 of them we met in advance. And of course, we don't know what their journey through the week is going to be. But we felt that they did represent a diversity of perspectives. That's so important to us. The program is interesting because it's one of these rare spaces in American life where people with different political points of view get together and try to talk to each other to find common ground or to disagree. And so we wanted those diversity of perspectives, of backgrounds. And as Amanda was saying, Missouri is a very diverse state. It's got big cities and rural small towns and everything in between. And so we did crisscross the whole state, and we found, I think, a great cast. And then we just had to kind of roll the dice to say, are they going to do well in this experience? Are we going to find this story through this week? And then we allowed room to cast really well, as many as we needed to, but there was one girl who emerged during the week who became a big part of the film. And that was true in Boys State. We actually pre-cast the film and got lucky. And then one character named Renee showed up and immediately announced himself.
He cast himself.
Yeah. Yeah, that tends to be what happens. You cast yourself.
Yeah.
When you arrive on the scene, you give an extraordinary speech. You just suddenly someone we need to pay attention to.
So incredible.
Thank you for sharing that, Jesse. That's really funny about how people really choose themselves to be a part of the process. And of course, both of you are open and say, you know what, we're going to trust them because they want to be a part of it. And Emily, it seems like that was almost your experience saying, I want to be a part of this documentary. So can you share more about what it was like being in this first project of yours? And then, of course, what the process was like along the way?
Right. So obviously I've never been in a documentary before, so I didn't know what to expect. But when we were initially learning that there would be a documentary at Girls State, I was really excited. So I signed the interest form and I Zoomed with one of the producers, and she explained to me the project, and I got to watch Boys State, which seeing Boys State, I was even more excited to be a part of the doc because I saw the impact that Boys State had the potential to make and the impact that it did make. And it was so exciting to be a part of something like that. I didn't know how mainstream it would become. And now seeing it on Apple TV, it's just a really surreal experience.
And just zooming back, how did you find out about Girls State before this even happened?
Yes. So my sophomore year of high school, my guidance counselor told me, hey, I have this program for you that the summer after your junior year of high school, we know it's perfect for you, since they had known I had an interest in politics. So I'd been aware of Girls State since the summer of my sophomore year, so about a year in advance. And when it rolled around, I had that week free in my schedule, ready to go. And I was really excited to have that opportunity to test out this political landscape and talk to a lot of girls from across Missouri.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, let's kind of dig more into the story, and feel free, everybody can respond to this. I think one of the most interesting, conflict points of the story is that there was the leaked Dobbs versus Jackson decision that was very much top of mind for everybody in Girls State. And I think the way that this was a through line throughout the project was really beautiful. And I wanted to get more perspective on how this ended up being something that was a thread that not only did we see many of the subjects talk about on their day-to-day, it was a campaigning point for the governor position, it was on the Supreme Court's table, and then, of course, now we know what the official United States Supreme Court has ruled and how many characters, for example, like yourself, Emily, have kind of seen this taken up years later from the film.
I'll start just by saying that the power of these programs for us as storytellers is they really focus our attention on the issues that we all care about as Americans, but for the perspectives of young people. And the issue of abortion came up at Boys State, but the boys were really uncomfortable talking about it. I think they recognized that in an all-male space, perhaps they shouldn't have that discussion. And so it left us with a great curiosity. We know that abortion is really dividing the country, has been for a long time, and even more so now with the decision, the Dobbs decision. And so as with all documentary, unscripted filmmaking, timing is a matter of luck and maybe instinct, but we were preparing to shoot the film, knowing that the Dobbs decision was being heard by the court. We didn't know that the decision would leak just before we filmed. And I think because of the leak, it really focused the conversation. Girls were already planning to talk about the issue. We knew that from casting the film the months preceding the week. And we knew that abortion was a really critical issue in Missouri. It's a trigger law state, meaning that if Roe was overturned, abortion would be effectively outlawed in the state. So the stakes were really high for the country, for the girls in Missouri, and for the state of Missouri. For all of those reasons, we expected it to be a big topic.
Also, Girls State in Missouri builds this third branch of government, a Supreme Court, and that's not something they do in Texas with the boys. And so we knew way in advance that was another reason we wanted to go to Girls State in Missouri, because there was the potential that this space would be created where, if only for a moment, women would be owning that conversation, no matter where you were on, your position on abortion. It would be a conversation amongst women on a Supreme Court with all females. And I think that was sort of a special, had the potential to be an interesting space to witness. And I liked then what we saw. It was not a debate of morality. It was a legal debate. It was a question of privacy. It was a conversation about the sort of constitutional laws around privacy. And that's really interesting, and something that I hope is a text for further conversation for young people who come and watch the film.
Certainly there's a feeling too that the policies around abortion, the laws have largely been made by men for women. And I think that we felt that the potential was we could watch young women talk about this issue. I just don't think we see that much in our political discourse. And we knew that for some of the women we were talking to and casting, this was not a theoretical issue. Like if they got pregnant and they decided that they wanted to have an abortion, they would have to travel out of state if that was the law of the land in Missouri. So I think for those reasons, we thought, let's go and let's see what happens. And it was also interesting to see initially that the girls were really not given permission to engage in substantive political conversation, and there was frustration, and that was not just around the issue of abortion, but a lot of other issues. And it frustrated us, but ultimately it did become the topic of conversation.
Sorry, I'm muted. I live beside a train station. What can we say? Emily, do you want to share more about your perspective?
I would just say that, like Jesse and Amanda said, I think earlier in the week, it wasn't something that we were talking about as much. I think people were talking about it, but we were talking about it at the lunch table rather than in designated time for political discussion, which was a little frustrating since I had assumed that since it was like a political camp, we would be having time to discuss these issues. But I think the program really does allow girls to decide what they want to talk about when. And so I found that it was a topic that we were talking about more during lunch and passing than during classes and things like that, which was really interesting to me and not what I had expected. But I knew that it would be a big topic going in. So I had like an annotated copy of the leaked draft at the time. And I remember like preparing to talk about it with girls at the program. So I know that a lot of people, it was on the forefront of their minds during the week.
Thanks. Thanks for sharing that. And I want to hold on to this conversation about what was actually happening on the ground in Girls State, because another contention point is that both Girls State and Boys State have an update camp. and there were very clear, glaring differences between the female students and then also their male counterparts. Emily, how did that affect you and your peers when you were actually in classes and in lunch, seeing the differences, especially when there was the few times where key paths were being crossed on campus?
Right. So one of the interesting things to me was the buddy system because I got called in the buddy system a lot. So the boys didn't have to have a buddy to walk around campus, but the girls did, which I understand, like they said was for our safety. But what kind of message, when it's just boys and girls state on campus, does that send? And also, I go to Lindenwood and I feel pretty safe walking alone here in general. So it's just interesting that that was something that the boys didn't have to do, but the girls did. Then a lot of girls were really concerned with dress code, which wasn't on the forefront of my mind, but a lot of girls were concerned that the boys didn't have a dress code, but the girls did. And then I would say the most glaring difference for me, like throughout the week after doing some research, was the fiscal inequalities between the two programs. And that was shocking. But after doing some research and asking around, I found out that there's like a big budget difference, which, just is unfortunate. It's because they're funded through different organizations, but still it makes you ask some questions.
Jesse, Amanda, anything to add? I know it was a great storyline to have Emily's article kind of push us through to the end of the documentary.
It was important to us that we give Girls State its due, that we didn't intend the film to be a comparison of programs, but really to center the story around the girls' experience in talking politics and being in this really interesting environment. And at the same time, we were intrigued that the Girls State program was going to be run in parallel with the Boys State on the same campus for the first time in their 80-year history. And we thought that might just result in some interesting social interactions, but certainly not a comparison. We didn't know about the differences between the programs or the discrepancy in funding until Emily ferrets it out in the film. So I think it came as a surprise to all of us and to them. And I think the meaning, the power of that discovery is not so much the disparity in programs, but what it says about our society as a whole, that women are held back from achieving equal representation and political power in our society because they are not given the same opportunities or the same expectations are not provided or made for them. And I think that is the power for me of Emily's incredible journalistic feat. We love watching her pick herself up after things don't go entirely according to plan. I guess we're talking after the screening, so everybody knows what happens.
Spoiler.
But I think it's the beauty of documentary storytelling is that we can meet somebody like Emily. We can go through this transformative experience with her. And it's just, we knew that, we knew she was plenty smart and ambitious, but we didn't know she was an extraordinary reporter. And she could not only write the story, but I think it's really truth to power, and I think that's inspiring. And I think will inspire a lot of people to ask questions that need to be asked and to call out these disparities.
Yeah, but back to the program, I do think there's some old-fashioned parts to these programs, as much as we believe in them as these very special spaces for young people to actually talk politics. It's an 80-year-old program, and there's some antiquated stuff that they're pushing to move into the 21st century, but they need more diversity. They need to allow the female programs to take the training wheels off more. There's just some campy stuff that was actually not surprising, but also surprising to me. I was like, oh, I know what this is, but I was also like, what? So that stuff they're working on, and actually the year after we filmed, partly because of the girls in our year, they now have an athletics program. They're now like speeding up the week a little bit. They're what else, Emily? They
have combined classes with the boys program now, so that like kind of we're able to use their budget and resources to have combined classes between boys and girls, which I think is really beneficial since we have boys and girls in the world. So I think that that's definitely progress.
I think the power of the film for us is that it makes visible some systems that are sometimes invisible or that we choose not to think about or to look at. They're all around us. I love that both Faith and Cece call that out. at the end of the film, Cece says, you know, the program should not just be conditioning women to kind of live within the system, but to combat it. And Faith talks about the sort of sneaky systems that hold women back. And so I think, you know, I say that as a man too. With married to a strong woman who's his partner and have two teenage daughters, I'd like to think I know something about these obstacles, but I found the film to be kind of a revelation for me. And I think for probably a lot of men coming to the conversation, they'll be startled to learn this. And I think most women are not as startled.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. I'm really glad that we had that conversation. Just going back to a little bit more of the overall image of Girl State, what do you hope to inspire out of your audience that watch this film? Emily, I want to start with you because many of people who are going to be watching this for the first time might be learning about Girl State and might have extreme interest in what you went through, and then also might be past the years of Girl State, but find everything that you're dealing with incredibly relatable.
So I think there's a lot of takeaways that could be taken away from Girls State. Obviously, female empowerment is, you know, the big one where we want women to be in office. We want female representation. But for me, the biggest takeaway throughout the week is, you know, it's okay to fail and then pick yourself up and do the next best thing. And, you know, that might not be a failure in of itself. Shoot for the moon. If you miss, you'll land among the stars is a saying that I like to say a lot, because I think it's okay to have big goals and big dreams and go for them, but then also be okay if they don't necessarily work out the way you had planned.
I love that. I think for me, both of these films have been a refresher on sort of a lot of things, but mostly there's another saying that democracy is not a spectator sport. And so you see sort of the enemy of all of this project really is apathy. And what you see in these kids is activated kids who care about the country, kids who aren't quite defined by Republican or Democrat yet, right? Because they haven't actually had to check that box in the ballot box yet. So I love how activated and energized and passionate these kids are. I sort of see these films a little bit as counter programming, actually, to like what people like to think about teenagers, that they don't care enough or they're apathetic. In fact, that's not what we see. I also think it's counter programming in the sense that everybody would say, "Oh, you're going to make Mean Girls or Lord of the Flies," or and I'm like, guys, actually, people are hungry for connection. And one of the great challenges for me in this project is actually meeting Emily, whose politics and my politics are different, but to extend yourself as a human being. And there are so many places of overlap and common cause, female representation in politics or in filmmaking for that matter, is something that I care about, that she cares about. There are certain no-go zones that I can't make connection on. And so, you know, election deniers, for instance, but there's a lot of other stuff in this big middle, messy middle that I find our film is a little bit of a challenge to audiences. Can you connect? Because our audiences are going to be generally left-leaning. Can you connect as a human being and listen the way that Emily listens? And I think that to me is the biggest takeaway. But yeah, you got anything to add?
I think to echo that, I think the power of listening, it's true in Boys State, and it's very much true with Emily's superpower is whether she, as a candidate or as a journalist, she listens, and she listens intently, and she finds conversation with people who are not like her. I think we could all learn from that. And like Amanda said, to find points of commonality and not focus on those things that divide us. I think that the gridlock and the kind of the division that are sown across America now can make one feel, I guess, pessimistic about our future. And I think that the women in this film inspire us, not because they're naive, they're idealistic and they're activated in ways that we can all learn from. And I think we need new politics. And I think maybe it's sad to say that we have to go to a youth program to find a new model of politics, but maybe that's exactly right. Like both in Boys State and Girls State, I think we're finding young people who show us and imagine for us a politics that can lead us forward, because we certainly need that.
Well, I think that is a beautiful way to end this Q&A. We can all listen better. Let's be like Emily and listen better. I want to thank all of you for being present and sharing your thoughts and experiences today, especially with the making of Girl State. Let's give everybody a little round of applause. It's really beautiful. And then I also want to thank Apple TV Plus, of course, for sponsoring the screening of Girl State. For everybody who's watching this Q&A, I hope you feel inspired. I hope you feel motivated to also share this movie with your friends, your family, maybe somebody who's on the different political spectrum as you, because we can all learn from this story. And I hope you all participate in another screening of Doc NYC's Spring Showcase. Have a lovely day, and thank you again so much for being present, y'all.